Ancient Ethiopia. From a scientific perspective, the history of the world and its people begins millions and billions of years ago. From a spiritual standpoint, the history of the world and humanity begins after the creation of Adam. Time has been counted downward from that moment until the birth of Christ, after which it began to be counted upward as a new era. Science cannot fully explain our origin or our destination, but we cannot escape accountability. Therefore, humans were created from the dust of the earth, the fire of the cherubim, the breath of the wind, and the water of the abyss. From the Creator, we received consciousness, life, and vitality. We were also given the law to govern creation, and the penalty for breaking that law is death. You are dust, and to dust you shall return, and you shall surely die. This is why we find ourselves facing death today. Until science can overcome death, we must choose our origin carefully, as our destination is determined by it. However, when it comes to Ethiopian history, there is no room for doubt. According to geological studies, it is confirmed that humans have existed in the Horn of Africa. When calculating Ethiopia's age, we find that it is a country with a history of 5,844 years. This includes 3,844 years before the birth of Christ and 2,000 years after, totaling 5,844 years. To understand this timeline, let us briefly examine it. The term "year of the world" refers to the time calculated from the creation of the world. After the birth of Christ, time began to be counted upward from that moment. In ancient histories, there is much confusion, but let us take an example. The time of the Great Flood, when Noah and his family were saved, was 3,844 years before the birth of Christ. This is calculated as 1,656 years after the creation of the world. In total, this makes 5,500 years since the creation of the world, and the Great Flood occurred in the 1,656th year of the world. In relation to this, 1 year is calculated as 254 days in the lunar calendar and 365 days in the solar calendar. The discovery of the solar calendar by humans may have caused some confusion, but we should not dwell on it. Therefore, understanding the ancient history of Ethiopia, even to some extent, helps us understand present-day Ethiopia and envision its future. There are various global and spiritual documents that touch on Ethiopian history. However, when it comes to Ethiopian history, a unified conclusion has not been reached. This is because different writers have presented varying accounts of Ethiopia's origins. Let us briefly examine the origin and meaning of the word Ethiopia. Ethiopia is derived from eth, meaning gift, and iop, meaning gold or precious stone. Some historians write that it refers to the gift of gold or precious stone of Zion. Other writers suggest that after the Great Flood, one of Noah's sons, Ham, had a son named Cush, who in turn had a son named Nimrod. Nimrod's descendants included Ethel, who first came to Ethiopia and entered the land where gold, known as Iop, was found. Thus, the kingdom was named Ethiopia. Some writers also suggest that Ethiopia means the land of the burnt face or the land where the sun burns. This country was bordered by Egypt to the north, the Nile to the west, the Arabian lands to the east, and the Indian Ocean to the south. Long before the birth of Christ, the descendants of Cush, who were part of Ham's lineage, inhabited this land. These Cushites were shepherds and nomads, and their primary livelihood was cattle herding. They had not yet discovered mining and used tools made from obsidian rock. Over time, as they advanced, they began to use iron and other metals for tools. As their population grew, their civilization advanced, and they began to discover valuable minerals such as gold, silver, and other precious stones. These minerals were found in abundance in regions like Uganda and Somalia. The Egyptians, 2,500 years before the birth of Christ, entered Ethiopia in search of gold and other precious items. They came via the Nile and the Red Sea. Since this was before the writing of the Torah, they referred to the land as Cush. Later, Moses, who was educated in Egypt, wrote about the land of Cush in the Torah. The Egyptians took gold from Ethiopia and used it to create idols and statues of their gods and kings. Many of the ancient statues found in Egypt today were made from Ethiopian gold. Some historians also mention that Oram, a descendant of Adam, ruled Ethiopia 970 years after the creation of the world. His descendants are said to have ruled Ethiopia. Before the Great Flood, the people who existed are called antediluvians. We know little about them except what is written in the Bible. It is believed that they were scattered in small areas in Asia, but before the flood, there were no humans in Africa, Europe, or America. The Great Flood is believed to have lasted from November to March, after which the waters receded. Noah's Ark rested on a high mountain in Armenia, known as Mount Ararat, which is still visible today. It is likely that the survivors of the flood settled near the Euphrates River. This area is believed to be the original homeland of the earliest tribes.